I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton.
And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club.
The podcast where we say, hey, don't listen to yourself, listen to us. And that's not a cult. It's just fun.
Yeah, we're actually the opposite of the cult in that we're constantly being like, if you don't like our ideas, just go away. Or is that the culty-ish thing we could do? I think someone one time said that that's fascist.
Yeah, we've actually been called fascists for saying that in the podcast where just the two of us are speaking, we're only saying our own opinions.
Anyway, if you like this podcast, please draw a little bit of blood, tithe to us.
Yeah, come live in our
commune. No, don't. You know, I have that fear of being frogged.
I want you to get frogged so bad. It would be crazy because you like made it up. And I feel like for you to invent some sort of crime and then have it committed upon you would be Shakespearean.
At the very least, you can write us a 5-star review and Ashley will personally thank you at the end of the episode. And if you don't like us, feel free to find your own cult.
Yeah.
Or start your own cult.
Oh, that's a very good idea. And then email us and let us know how it's going.
Cult Leaders Anonymous. It's hard to keep people in line.
I'm so stressed out. I have to make decisions for everybody.
Anyway, Ashley.
Yes, Claire?
If you were a celebrity and you were to write a memoir, what would the chapter of last week's title be called?
It would be called Every Start is a Reset.
I feel like if you were to do a mass compilation of all of our weeks, we really haven't shown any growth at all. But continue.
You know, we got back from a trip that we had a really hard time with because we're the weakest girls on earth. And I feel like this was the first week that I felt like really back in my life. And I felt like I was like really taking action towards things that I have wanted to do in a good way. Like I feel like there are things that I've been wanting to dive into with neighborhoods, friendship. Like I feel like I've been making lists of like, these are the things I like want to go to show up for community stuff like gardening club. I went to bird club last week and I hadn't been in a while, especially for the whole meeting. I had been going for like half an hour and then dipping because I'm stressed about stuff. And I can't just like walk around looking at birds. But actually it's quite nice if you just force yourself to reset and look at birds. And then I have like a list of people that I haven't reached out to in a while where I'm just like, you have to make plans with people if you want to have people in your life. So I've been like checking in.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay, Claire, what would you title your chapter?
I would actually similarly title it, You Gotta Ruin Things to Learn a Lesson.
Okay.
Okay, I just turned 32 yesterday. It's the day after my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. And for my 32nd year, I have like 8 goals. And I would say the only not binary goal of like, yes, you did it or no, you didn't, is I would like to get better at flower arranging.
Okay.
I feel like that's difficult to judge because it's like a habit. It's a skill. It's hard to like be like, yes, you got good at it or no. But I will say I tried yesterday, and part of getting better at something is being bad at it first. Maybe this isn't a hard thing for anybody but me. Maybe a lot of people are going, how did you buy something as beautiful as flowers and then like take them from the shape you got them and put them in the same shape and somehow they're uglier now? But oh Lord, you know when you do something and you're like, is it getting better? And you're like, I think it's getting better. And then it gets a little better. And then you're like, and with this, I've ruined it. It really went from like, I can't tell if this is ugly or pretty to, oh, it's so bad now. But I think that that's where you learn lessons. And I do think I learned a lesson, and check back in next week.
Can I say, on this podcast, we love lessons.
Something I've been thinking about a lot is how I mocked Kendall and Kylie.
For realizing stuff?
Yeah, they're always like, I think I like want to experience things. And if you want to experience things, you have to experience them. Or like, this is the year I'm going to be realizing things. And because I was in my 20s and they're so mature for their age, I thought like, what are they talking about? But now that I'm in my 30s, I'm like, it is so true though, that if you want to experience something, you do just like have to be experiencing them. And if you're not, then you're not being honest with yourself. And then the other truth is that like, you're just like realizing things all the time.
That's so true.
And unfortunately, Kendall and Kylie, I need you guys back on the air. I guess they're still out there, but I need to learn more.
There's nowhere for me to really tune in.
Yeah, I don't believe in their new show.
No.
Anyway,
so should we get to a book about someone who really realized some stuff? And it's that God is real.
In a different way than
she originally suspected.
Dinner for Vampires, Life on a Cult TV Show. While also in an actual cult. This book was done phenomenally.
Oh, it's a fun read. It's like sad and scary also, but
it's
like
emotional, but it reads like a novel. It reads
very
like a teen
compelling
book. It's written like incredibly writerly. in a way that like makes it better. And I believe her because at the beginning she goes, I take copious notes and journals. She's like, I was every night journaling for hours. So I have like perfect records of what happened.
And then throughout the book, her journals come up where like she has to read them in front of this freaky dude.
You know how Caroline Calloway gets a lot of praise for like one of her good business moves was at the beginning buying followers from book Instagram?
Yeah.
I think like one of the brilliant things that Bethany Joy Lenz does is she writes this book for like the exact person who would have loved One Tree Hill.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It like
me.
Yeah. Like I kind of think it reminds me so much of your favorite teen books like Gingerbread or G2G. What was that book that was written in all AIM?
Oh my God. Like TTYL.
Yeah. I was trying to remember the names of all these books I loved in like 7th through 9th grade. And it's written so similarly to that. And I really think that even the title Dinner for Vampires is really latching on to that genre of 2000s culture of like teen dramas, teenage life, which is her fan base. Do you know what I mean? People who were teenagers 15 years ago. And so I just want to give her a lot of credit for that.
And like the cover, it like so perfectly works with like the pacing of the book. And then the contents of it are really intense. Yeah. But she writes it in a way where you like kind of detach from reality because she says in the intro or in the author's note, she changed names to protect people's privacy and also for legal reasons. I don't know. I like kind of went down a little bit of a Reddit hole to see if I could find any identifying information, and it's quite difficult. So it feels so detached from reality because all of the names are made up, even though all of the characters are real.
Yeah, the world building was amazing. I took a break to have a bite of breakfast. And when I came back, I felt like I could feel the noticeable shift in my reality.
Yeah, it was immersive.
Credit where credit's due. It opens in the prologue. I don't want to do this anymore. We need to separate for a while.
So she is opening with a fight with her husband. She has a 9-month-old baby and she is working on setting boundaries and saying, if you are going to throw things, we can't be in conversation. And he throws a sweatshirt at her. And so she has to make a decision. Is a sweatshirt a big enough deal for me to walk out of my marriage and out of this family that I'm a part of, quote unquote family, not a real family?
It was only a sweatshirt. Before that, it was only a toy, only a book, only a cell phone, only potted plants, only a vintage rolling metal laundry basket colliding with a wall, ricocheting to the floor, and scaring our tough 5-pound Yorkshire Terrier so badly he shit himself right where he stood. He had only injured his hand punching holes in several of our walls and doors. A sweatshirt was really nothing. But she's in LA and she has to decide right there. She's been working with a therapist. She goes, do I enforce this boundary that I had set with him? No violence in front of me and the baby? Or do I like ask him to just try to quiet down and see where it goes?
If you leave, he spat, I will get a lawyer and I will take her from you. I will fight for custody and I will win. I will take her away from you. He was so confident the girl he knew wouldn't leave. The girl he knew would stay because in spite of endless struggle and depression, she hadn't left. The girl he knew was committed to making the marriage work. She was trying to be a godly, submissive wife. The girl he knew needed him.
He goes to take a shower and luckily she's given this moment where she's like, I can escape right now. So she grabs the baby and heads for the car and she drives to a friend's house. The next day, he takes the flight they were both supposed to take back to Idaho where they were based. And he starts berating her via text. He's going back and forth between abusive texts and screaming at her to like pleading texts saying, why don't you come back? And then he gets very cold and shut down. After a week with those old friends and phone calls with my therapist and parents, I was reminded of that other girl I used to be before. I reminded I still was her. And finally, I reached a place where I could say it. I was in a cult and I had to get out.
Oof.
Part 1.
So now we are in her childhood.
And a lot of the story is based on her relationship to Christianity and God through the people around her. My first recollection of the American Christian culture crockpot I was baked into was around 1985. Me, age 4, sitting in the middle of the back seat bench in my parents' black Harvester Scout, where my tan string bean legs stuck to the vinyl as I endured a 17-hour drive from South Florida to Central Texas. So her parents had met at a small Christian school. Her dad was immediately smitten. Within 3 years, Bethany Joy Lenz was born, and they ended up moving to Florida to live with his dad while they both looked for work.
Oh, I also want to clarify. So her name is Bethany Joy Lenz. She goes by Joy, and I feel like that's what we'll just call her.
Yeah. Even though professionally she goes by Bethany. Like her credits are Bethany, but if you met her, you'd call her Joy.
Okay, so she moved around a lot as a kid. Her dad had a teaching degree, but like wasn't a teacher, and then would move for jobs pretty regularly. They moved to Texas when she was, I think, 8, and then moved 4 more times in the next 8 years. They were constantly just moving around, and she had a really hard time making friends. and felt very comforted by the persistent presence of Jesus.
I found making friends to be a challenge. It wasn't just the solitude of being an only child. I felt the profound disconnect between my life, riding to school in a truck with busted heat while warming my hands on the cigarette lighter, and the other kids who arrived at the school in Cadillac Escalades and had new magical mansion Barbie dream houses. My social life basically consisted of the singing melody doll and our new Cocker Spaniel puppy, so I was extremely relieved to discover that Jesus would be my permanent friend.
She was also not great in school. She had ADHD, which she wasn't diagnosed until later.
Oh my God. I'm sorry. New edict. If you're writing, I don't care. We have to assume that everybody has ADD and like go from there. If you don't have ADD, let's hear about that. It's enough. The way that she's like, it would be years before I was diagnosed with my own neurodivergent brain. The example she gives later, I was just like, it's okay to just be bad at school. I don't know. Not everybody's a straight A student. That's why it's curved. We can't keep living this life being like, you don't understand. When I was 8 years old, I didn't love to read a book and then write a report card. That means my brain is broken. Enough.
I would love to actually read a book from someone who comes out as not having ADHD. Can you imagine if we like open a book and it goes, so you'll never believe this. But one thing I loved was sitting in school and learning lessons based on the Illinois state guidance for what lessons should be.
We have to like let it go.
So the place where she felt most at home and comfortable and excited was on stage. She was put in an acting class and she came the fuck alive. And she was like, oh, this is awesome. It was perhaps inevitable that I'd become a performer. My family had a long history with the performing arts. Her grandparents were actually actors.
And eventually, pretty early in her life, I think 8 years old, they moved into their grandmother's house after it was left to them in a will. And they were raised there till college in the house that her grandmother left her dad. And she had like a incredible attic full of like all of these, not pieces of evidence that feels clinical.
Playbills and costumes.
Yeah, but
and
what would you call that?
Relics?
Yeah.
Remnants?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, trinkets, memories. She had a bunch of stuff. She had a lot of crap.
A lot of crap in that attic.
And Joy loved it.
And she had told her grandma that she wanted to be an actor, and her grandma was like, love that for you. And it was her grandma's dying wish that she would be on Broadway someday.
And I gotta say, her parents were very supportive. In a rare change of tune from me and Ashley, I will say good job getting her into acting, I guess. I don't know, maybe not. She did end up in a cult, so I guess everything her parents did, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if I could say good or bad job to her parents. I finished this book incredibly neutral on her parents.
And I think that's valid.
Yeah.
Cults are all around us. It just depends on whether or not you have eyes to see them.
I don't mean neutral as in no thoughts. I mean neutral as in both positive and negative thoughts that completely balance each other.
Anyway, so from when she was around 8, 9 years old, she is in plays and she's like coming alive. So they have her audition for local commercials. And then her mom gets in the habit of taking her out to LA a few times a year and up to New York City a few times a year, especially once they move up to New Jersey to audition for bigger things. And she is landing roles.
I mean, this is a fun little fact. She was in the final round of Mickey Mouse Club auditions the year that Brittany and Justin got it, which means she was also there the year Jessica Simpson didn't get it. I wonder if she was like at the camp with Gosling and the gang.
Oh, I'm sure she was. So she moves to New Jersey. She tries to be a cool New Jersey tough girl, much like yours truly, wearing plaid and smoking cigarettes. I guess this would have been the 90s, so it was like Nirvana era.
Yeah.
Anyway, she did not fit in. And so who is the people she feels most aligned with? The French, which arguably the worst group of people. She changed the spelling of her name to Joy, Joie, which is, I have to say, if you're having a hard time finding friends at any school in America,
becoming obsessed with the French is like not the way to go. If
a girl was already struggling to make connections, she's like, actually, I'm not Joy anymore, I'm Joie. I'd be like, okay, well, now I'm definitely going to bully you. That is like a bullyable offense.
She becomes obsessed with Les Mis. I was lonelier every day and missed my Texas theater community. Her mom was taking her to New York for auditions, but she wasn't really building a community in New York because she lived like an hour and a half away. And then she meets a boy at church.
That first night changed my life as I knew it.
I mean,
it like literally didn't. But I think that that's what she doesn't understand. That's why she's still susceptible to a cult, unfortunately. I think that's like a real fact that if you're in a cult once, you'll be in a cult twice.
Yeah.
The relationship she has with this boy that she calls Blue Eyes is one of the more mystifying things that she hasn't yet gotten clarity on, I think.
It is tough because, you know, people be crushing. Teenage girls are crushing. I think especially teenage girls in like a weird purity culture situation.
Yeah.
have like a real lack of understanding. I don't know. It's very cute and naive crush that turns into like a lifelong conversation where I'm just like, oh no.
So he comes over and says hello, and she goes, I'm going to marry you. He comes from a nice family. He has 2 boys and a girl. Not him, but the family. They were happy and friendly, and the whole of them always looked like they just climbed off bicycles in Nantucket. Quickly, he and I became the very, very best of friends. We talked for hours every night. We both loved Jesus and the Dave Matthews Band. We had the same sense of humor, and he was the only other person I knew who hated cats.
Since I didn't belong to a theater community anymore, I decided he would be where I belonged.
So they like become pen pals, and they're always on the phone, and she's traveling a ton for these auditions, but they stay in touch. She's going to his family's lake house, and I'm like, oh, this is your boyfriend, but they're just friends. And he has a girlfriend the whole time. She's like, he was so cute. He was the star athlete. He was dating the head cheerleader. And I was just like his Jesus nerd friend that he confided in, but we were so close emotionally, and it was very difficult for me.
She's getting a ton of pilots, which I think is very interesting. I think it's a really interesting part of the business that people don't really ever go in depth about, but that is so fascinating to like film and shoot all of these pilots and then never have a show picked up.
She was actually in a pilot about a bunch of teenagers during the 70s that would have starred Ben Foster and Gabrielle Union, but unfortunately Fox announced their lineup first, and that 70s show was on it, and they didn't want to go head to head.
She could have snuffed out Wilmer Valderrama.
So she's going out for all these auditions. She's bulwarking herself against the rejection, though, because she has Blue Eyes' number, and she loves talking to him. And one of her big rules for herself is never show anybody that you're a burden. So even though she's going through turmoil at home, her parents don't get along. They're always fighting, and she feels very gaslit by her mom's obsession with being like, everything's fine, even though she can hear them screaming. She knows they don't have a lot of money. She knows that they've moved around a lot for struggling. She's like, I'm not ever going to dump that on Blue Eyes, like his annoying girlfriend who's always like crying in front of him.
Yeah. She's facing rejection, but she is also like, her shows are getting rejected. She herself is booking a lot, and she's starting to gain some traction in rooms. Like her name is becoming recognizable to people within the industry.
She's in a movie called Thinner by Stephen King. She becomes an understudy on Broadway.
And then she gets a job on Guiding Light, the soap opera, which is a pretty big deal, but it leads to her getting dropped from her worship team.
At church, they said they don't want to be seen like supporting tawdry things like teenagers in soaps.
And then also her parents are going through a divorce at the time. And so the divorce plus her being on a soap opera makes her just like a bad look for the church, I guess.
Her mom says it's complicated for the congregation. It's interesting. She says that her dad started out as a really typical 70s Jesus-loving hippie, but they ended up in like an evangelical world. And it's funny because I guess her take on evangelicism is she's like, I think she knows it kind of has a bad rap, but she's very clearly like part of that world. And I don't think she has a problem with it. I think she's just like, I know that there's like a snake oil salesman aspect to that world, but their ideas are really good. Divorce is criminal and will be smote by God, and you shouldn't really be on TV.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, she wants to so bad.
Unfortunately, she loves acting so much. And I think getting fired from her worship team was the first time that her passion and her career aspirations were at odds with her faith.
Meanwhile, at home, her parents are divorced. Immediately, her dad moves out and gets married. Her and her mom are at each other's throats. Things are really bad. She's like, we're constantly screaming at each other. We never curse because we're Christians, but it is pretty bad. And I'm often thinking that I hate her, but I would never say it because of the Christianity.
As soon as she graduates high school, she moves to New York City, which I think is really interesting and kind of badass. And it really was fascinating to me the way things fell off from here.
Well, I think you're missing a really important detail. The day after she graduated high school, her mom married a different man and moved to California and said, you have till Wednesday to get out of this house. I sold it.
Yeah.
That's like, I think a pretty important foundational understanding of where she was at in terms of like looking for home. Like, why was she so susceptible to a cult? Well, her dad got married like months after her parents got divorced, moved out, started a new family, had a new baby. The day she was like no longer legally in charge of her daughter, her mother moved to the other side of the country with a man and like left her homeless. Her mom moved on a Sunday and she goes, on Wednesday, the new family moves in. All your shit has to be out by.
Yeah. No, that's bad. That's bad.
I just think it like sets the scene for why she was so lost emotionally.
Yes. No, it really does. And luckily, Guiding Light had offered to amp up her role to series regular. So she moves to New York. Again, I think being 18 alone in New York, working on a soap opera, that is cool and it could have gone either way if her parents had not,
I think it's really cool. I just don't think we can leave out the detail about the
Yes.
fact that there was truly no home left for her to go to.
True.
And nobody was looking out for her. And she was like by herself.
True.
The one relationship she had was with her mother, which was like tumultuous, whatever, teenage girls, moms.
Well, the one
it happens.
relationship she had was her imaginary relationship with Blue Eyes.
Yeah. Anyway, and right after graduation, she kisses him at his party and he kind of doesn't really acknowledge it. And she's like, he's yanking me back and forth. And I'm like, I guess I'm getting a pretty clear sign of what it is that he wants from you. And it seems like nothing. I guess I think if you kiss a teenage boy and he like ignores it, that's a pretty clear sign he's not interested, because most teenage boys are horny as hell. To be as hot as Bethany Joy Lenz kissing some boy that gets along with her really well, like he has to really not like you romantically.
It's so funny because this was my big complaint with the latest season of Emily in Paris, where people kept kissing Gabriel and he was acting like there was nothing he could do about it. I was like, no, the thing you can do about it is just kind of be like, ooh, no, thank you. And that's what he did. He did the thing that you can do.
But look, it didn't even make the message cross. Anyway, so she moves to New York City and she is doing great. She's getting booked on stuff. She has her series regular on Guiding Light. She lives in Union Square and she's building a real life in New York where I developed my deepest friendships in church. She's part of this small like apartment hang Bible study from this couple that moved from South Africa and started kind of a church in their living room. And she goes and she finds a lot of like spiritual connection there, but they also really insist that she go out into the world and try other churches as well. And so she loves Reverend Dr. Timothy Keller, who is a pioneering evangelist who is widely respected for his intellect and engaging thoughtfully in contemporary culture. I didn't personally consider him an evangelist, which to me is a tan salesman with a Southern accent on my TV asking for money. Tim was a theologian and insisted on reason as the entry point for faith.
That is important. That was something she liked before.
So she makes one really close friend named Camille, who's also an actress and also a Christian. And she had not met any other Christian actresses out in the world. So she's like, you're my soul sister. But immediately Camille's like, I got to get to LA. That's where the acting is.
So she decides to not renew her contract on Guiding Light because she doesn't want to get stuck in the soap opera world. And she spends another year in New York auditioning, trying to kind of make a go of it. And then she realizes, as she's running out of money, she has to get to LA. That's where the acting is.
So she gets to LA. She meets this woman named Minna, who's 10 years older than her. She's like, I can't believe that at 29, she could be that beautiful. I am like, well, you're in your 30s now. Surely you know.
I think she's in her 40s and she's also still really beautiful.
And if not you, then look at Sophia and Hillary. I just can't really call this woman's face to mind, really. And her photo on this cover is kind of, you know, when you're like looking dead at somebody and you're like, but I still can't really get a grip on what you look like. It's how I feel about Jennifer Aniston and all those Aveeno commercials. I'm like, is there Aveeno on the lens? Like, why can't I really get a look at you?
But when you look at her Instagram, which is notoriously the best representation for what someone actually looks like, that's when you see a beautiful face.
Oh my God, a woman could be beautiful in her 40s?
Yeah, the way she's professionally photographed here is really spectacular.
Well, if someone could be beautiful in their 40s, then I guess there was a good shot that Minna could have been also really beautiful even at 29.
Yeah, I believe it. I actually wholeheartedly believe Minna was beautiful. So Minna is a series regular on a detective show, and she is like extremely lonely in LA. She moves to LA. She's like, everything is so spread out. It's so hard to meet people, to get involved in this world. I feel completely alone. She gets introduced to Minna, who is also a Christian. She goes to meet Minna on her set the day that Minna happens to be getting fired. So Minna's crying, but she's like, you know what? It's good. God has a plan for me. So Minna invites her to move in. They become roommates. And Minna's also like, you should start coming to this Bible study with me that I go to in North Hollywood. It's also like a house Bible study for actors and entertainment industry people led by these awesome Christians.
I can't believe nobody knows who these people are.
Well, that's what I'm saying. She changed the name.
Yeah, I get that, Ashley.
Oh.
But I'm saying I can't believe nobody can figure out who they are.
I'm going to do a deeper dive.
If anybody knows, can you send us links? And normally I don't ask for this, but if you can figure it out, send us links.
Because they seem pretty successful.
On this show with her friend Minna is this new guy named Harker Van Hewitt. I guess, I can't believe I didn't realize that wasn't a real name.
Can I just Google really quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so we realized that the reason we can't figure out who Harker and Minna are,
Yeah.
I call her Mina when I was reading this.
I call her Mina.
Okay. Anyway, so the reason we can't figure out who it is because we are reading an advanced copy of this book. And so Reddit has not had an opportunity to like hear her pseudonyms and do the investigation.
But when you are hearing it, dear listener,
we'll figure it out.
The book will be out and we will be discussing on the Patreon. And also, I'm going to see if we can get a cult expert on the Patreon.
Yeah, we're going to work on it. And if not, I have a book that I've reserved at the library to say what the cult expert knows.
www.patreon.com/Celebrity Memoir Book Club. Right?
Correct. Anyway, so she moves in with Mina, and Mina is like low-key obsessed with this guy who is an actor she knows, who she started going to his Bible study. Him and his brother have a Bible study in North Hollywood, and she like is in love with him, but he's 10 years younger than her. And she's just been fired from her TV show, and she's like sad and all the time. And she was like, isn't it funny that now that I'm going to Bible study and I'm devoting my life to Christianity, everything is horrible? LOL.
Then something terrible happens.
9/11. So
it's just sad for her because she loves New York.
Yeah, she lived there for 2 years.
Oh my God, actually? Minna goes, you're so sad and you're so depressed and you haven't left your bed. The only thing that'll get you out of here is Bible study. And she takes her to Bible study to help her get over the devastation of 9/11.
Okay, I'm sorry for making fun of her. She's actually one of the more 9/11 people. Her and Jessica Simpson have been 9/11 in almost equal and opposite ways.
I can't believe Jessica Simpson came out of it $1 billion richer and
she came out $2 million to the cult.
So she goes to the Van Hewitt house, which is Harker Van Hewitt. He lives there with his brother, Abe. Abe is a band. Harker is like...
Abe is in a band.
Yeah, but according to her, she's like the heart and soul.
He.
If you're going to be nitpicky about it, okay.
I'm just trying to get the sentences sorted because there's a lot of names that come up here. And because, once again, we're told these people are moderately famous, but they're not real names and they're not linked to any... Like, it took me a while to get all the names in this book.
I'm desperate to know why, in renaming these brothers, she made one Abe, like a good old-fashioned Old Testament name, and then the other one Harker, one of the more nonsense Mormon destined for TikTok stardom names.
Yeah.
I guess because the younger brother is like a teen heartthrob in the making, she says, then Abe is...
I guess Mormon. So they're going to this Bible study and it is amazing. Like everyone is open and loving. When you show up, everyone hugs. Pam is their mom and she's made the most homely home in North Hollywood.
Ed, the husband, is a physician. The family had been Seventh-day Adventists, but grew disaffected with the church a couple years earlier and left. The two boys moved to LA to become stars, and the parents split their time between Idaho, where the dad's practice was, and LA. And so normally it's the boys leading this Bible study, and it is just a group of friends. Abe plays the guitar, and they sing, and then they talk. Sometimes the parents are there. Pam is always hugging people and keeping the rooms tidy, but it's really warm and fun.
Yeah. And then this guy that they met from their Idaho church acquaintances, he had a church that he left because of unnamed drama.
So basically, even though this guy Les and his wife Marty and their 3 boys are God-fearing good men, he was kicked out of his church because he wanted to grow in a way that they didn't want to grow. And some people can't accept God the way he wanted to accept God. And isn't that sad that he's such a good man that was thrown out of his own church?
No, it's really fucked up that they did that. Some people are really bad people not accepting someone as their leader. Ed had seen a sermon from this guy Les and was so moved by it that he invited him kind of into their lives. And it's announced that Les is going to be coming to their Bible study a lot more often and then kind of setting up his home base in their Idaho house, just moving into their house in Idaho. And when Pam and Ed are in Idaho, they're going to live in like the garage room.
See, Joy, you never know what someone's going through. Thank God for people like Les. I don't ever want to be too afraid to grow. The world is falling apart more and more every moment. I will not waste time in fear. I threw up a prayer. God, don't ever let me be too afraid to grow. Despite that vow, though, I wasn't about to eat whatever Les had cooked, so I made up an excuse to leave early. So as she leaves, Les approaches her and goes, so you're from New York? What are you doing out here? And she's like, I'm an actor. And he starts asking her questions and getting pretty deep pretty quickly. So like, well, what happened with your parents? How old were you when they split? So he asks her where she went to church in New York. And she says, a small home church, you wouldn't have heard of it. But I visited Redeemer Pres a lot on the Upper East Side. Tim Keller is brilliant. I wish I would have gone more regularly. And he goes, no way. I used to pastor with him before we left New York. You did? I'm surprised our paths didn't cross. I couldn't believe it. He used to work alongside the man who had been instrumental in growing my faith. It was like God was sending me a confirmation that I was on the right track. I immediately thought that this was someone I could trust.
Something that makes this book compelling in a mystery thriller type way, but a little bit discrediting of a like actual story type way is she is putting a lot of her trepidations early in the book. Like, of course, we know eventually she joins a cult and this and that, but the way she introduces him with his like weird smelling, disgusting food and his like gross hands and gross body.
And his like gross sons. Yeah.
It is hard up against. Immediately, I knew this was a man I could trust.
Yeah.
We're introduced to him in a very contradictory way. And I think it's fine because we're the reader and we know how this ends. But like there is a lot of interjections of her current realizations of how suspicious everything was.
I guess I don't know if I felt that way. I guess I believe that you have this apartment where like 6 people in their 20s who are all actors and actresses and in the industry get together weekly for a Bible study. And suddenly there's this family from out of nowhere who like is doing their own thing. And you'd be like, well, what the fuck are they doing here? And then I think it shows how he was able to gain her trust by lying. I mean, spoiler alert, I'm sure you could guess it. He was not working alongside this famous reverend. But do you know what I mean? I think it really shows the way he was able to pick somebody out of a crowd, get to the heart of their insecurities, the way he was like immediately asking about her divorced parents, the way he immediately is able to figure out who she respects and align himself with that person spiritually.
Yeah.
I think that shows how does like, when you say, well, how does some disgusting random dad move into your house and take over your life? That's how.
Yeah.
No matter how gross he looked, he was clearly like masterful at figuring out who feels isolated, getting to their root trauma immediately, and then figuring out how to put himself in a position of authority. And he does that in like 6 questions.
Yeah. Very impressive. Les had been coming to the Van Hewitt so often, he'd adopted the same high back chair on every visit. Because he was older and an actual pastor, we felt grateful for his presence. None of us noticed he was gradually taking over Harker and Abe's de facto roles as leaders of these meetings.
Not even Harker or Abe seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't object when Les began reading the scripture and kicking off the discussion. So now she starts going into like pretty in-depth conversations that really shows the way that he was able to start molding their thinking to like make everybody who wasn't Les alienated.
And to make them extremely reliant on his perception and teaching and approval.
Yeah. So one of the first lessons that sticks out is written about in this book is this idea that you need to speak the positive truth of someone's identity no matter how they're behaving. So an example is Emily is there. She's another girl who grew up with the Van Hewitts out in Idaho and is now a talent manager in LA. And she comes to these Bible studies because she knows the brothers. And she says, okay, so my brother's pretty negative and it's hard for me to talk to him on the phone. Shouldn't I be saying to him like, hey, you're pretty negative and I don't like it? And he's like, that's not true. He already knows he's negative. You don't need to point out people's flaws. And everybody's like, I don't know if that's true, actually. Like, I have flaws I'm sure that I'm not aware of. And he gets kind of annoyed that people are pushing back. And he says, what you need to say is, bro, I just want to let you know that I love talking with you. You're such a force of positivity in this world. And then like look at people how God made them as opposed to like by their earthly flaws. And then he says the reverse of this is if somebody tells you you're something that you don't believe, you can just say, I reject that. So you just say, I will not receive what you're telling me. And so already you can see the way he creates these like rubrics of denying the truth before you, only say these things that you're allowed to say. You're never allowed to like call anything out verbally, and that you're allowed to just like straight out reject other people's opinion. Because of course he's constantly telling them about their flaws. They have an entire like cult situation where they like lock you in a basement and make you reveal everything bad about you. And they sit there and go, yeah, that is bad or whatever. You know what I mean? So it's never consistent across everybody, but it's like a way to get their thinking of you can tell people no, that they're wrong and never tell the truth.
And it's also a way to be like, other people don't actually know the real you. They could be saying an observation that if you don't resonate with it, you can reject it and realize they don't know you at all. Like nobody knows you like I know you. And then she jumps right to a part where he manages to really zero in on her greatest insecurity, which is like being an unwanted replacement for someone else, like being second place. And he just kind of pulls it out of nowhere. You are gold. You are not almost there. You are there.
Les put his hand on my shoulder and it felt comforting. You don't need to do anything to earn your place here, not with God and not with us. Then she says, that night I released a burden I've been carrying forever, one that had compounded day after day, month after month, year after year. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to put on a show to have a place in the world. I cleaned myself up in the bathroom and we all piled into the kitchen to eat. I wasn't about to miss a second of this unconditional love. So she kind of has a breakdown in him saying, reject this path of thinking you're second best, only accept times when you are somebody's first choice, which of course is a way of kind of training her to be able to tell her when she's second choice and when she's first and getting to control her choices in the future. It makes her cry. And as we said with like that blue eyes thing, she has this complex about never seeming like a burden and never seeming weak to people. And she gets to cry and see that people accept her even with her vulnerabilities. And it's the first time she feels truly accepted, even though of course it's the first time she's ever tested it.
And I think that that is one of the really powerful things about this book is like showing the invention of these standards that only the person who invented them could ever possibly meet.
Yeah. And of course, like the hypocrisy, the way it's not actually a perspective that you carry to every part of your life. It's like a way of them highlighting when they want to control you. So of course, Les starts taking over her mindset and she's sharing these new ideas with her parents. And you can see that her parents are like, what the fuck is going on? For example, she told her dad that, I think God cares about every single detail of our lives. I'm asking God for guidance on everything. What auditions to go on, what friends to hang out with at what times, what movies to go see, even my outfit choices. And he's like, I don't think God cares about what you're wearing. And she goes, well, think about it. Like, what if God told some stranger out there that they were going to see a girl in a purple shirt today and that would be the sign they needed? What if I'm supposed to be the girl in the purple shirt, but I never took the time to ask God what I would wear so that the person never gets to see the sign? It is crazy.
Yeah, it's also just like, I don't know, man, God would turn your shirt purple if it was that important. And so her dad is very suspicious and starts asking questions. Again, her dad isn't being egregiously curious. He's being just reasonably curious.
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable to be like, don't you think that's a bit much? Do you really think God, who's like in charge of war, cares about your purple shirt?
Her dad starts asking questions like, what church is it affiliated with? And like, who is this guy in charge? I'm just curious about him. And she feels very rejected by his not immediate reception of her diving into her faith. She's like, you are the one who told me about God. Why aren't you stoked that I'm obsessed with God?
I couldn't believe he didn't understand. This was the first time I felt like maybe I understood something about God better than my dad did.
And then, of course, she feels comfortable talking to her Bible study group about how her dad isn't fully comfortable. And it, of course, lets Les know that, you know, it's important for him to drive a wedge further between her and her family.
And this is when he starts saying, like, it's important for you to set boundaries with your family. Not everybody has ears to hear God. And if they're not ready to hear it, then you have to reject their truth. I didn't notice that in all my protection over the truth of my identity, I wasn't practicing and speaking loving truth toward my own family. I guess it really didn't work both ways. So her dad comes to visit her and he's like, it's because my points were about to expire with an airline. And she's like, I suspected that it was to try to get me away from this group.
Yeah. So she feels that her parents are coming to try to rescue her from the only place where she's ever felt truly seen. Luckily, the weekend her dad comes to Bible study, Les is out of town back in Idaho.
And he kind of leaves being like, okay, I guess it is just a group of kids from LA talking about the Bible every Saturday. And he kind of backs off.
Then she has a birthday party and she invites her Bible study friends and her mom, her stepdad, and some of her acting friends. And seeing everyone interact, she's like, okay, there is definitely a vibe shift here.
But she's like, it just goes to show that my true friends are my Bible study friends.
Yeah.
All of my acting friends are like drinking and they're not mixing well.
And she didn't feel that the gifts they gave her were like true to her. She didn't feel seen. And then her mom has a bit of a confrontation with Pam.
So Pam, again, is these two brothers' mother. And she's also the one from Idaho that gave up her own home and is currently living in an apartment over the garage so that Les, his wife, and his 3 boys can live in her house.
And so she goes to the mom and is very like, you and Joy don't get along.
And she says, hi, sweetheart. We were just talking about how amazingly resilient you are. This is Pam. Considering how much your parents struggled. You can tell the mom is like, what the fuck is going on? And so she grabs her daughter and says, yeah, she's so impressive. I'm really proud of her. And Pam says, she is so impressive, so independent. And her mom is like, yeah, I am really proud of my little girl. And she says she can feel like a weird tension between Pam and her mom. And then something happens. So the conversation ends. And there's like a moment where her mom goes to give a toast and is like, I want to give this gift to my daughter, Joy, in front of everybody. I worked so hard on it. And it's a scrapbook. And Joy loves scrapbooks. She loves her grandmother's scrapbooks. And in this scrapbook are all these baby pictures of her and pages from her 7th grade journal. And I kind of felt torn because she's like, there was a picture of me at 5 years old in the bathtub in this scrapbook. And she expected me to just show all my friends my shape at that age. And I was like, well, what was your shape at? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. You were 5. Who even cares? I'm like, okay, I do think the diary entry from your 7th grade is a little bit personal. I don't think your mom had the right to go through your old journals and like put in the scrapbook. But she is like humiliated beyond reason, and only Pam notices. And Pam is like, hey, are you okay? And Bethany kind of starts crying. And again, she feels like, ugh, my mom doesn't get me. Pam gets me.
Okay, so Mina is still absolutely toiling over her love for Harker. She is so sad because now his fiance from Idaho is coming to town for the weekend. He's going to come to Bethany's birthday party, the party where all this mixing and drama happened. And at the birthday party, Joy overhears someone asking Harker, hey, is your fiance coming to town? And he goes, no, we broke up, or things aren't so good anymore. So then she goes to tell Mina, and immediately Mina and Harker get engaged.
Then a few weeks after my birthday party, I came home one night to find candles lit around the apartment. He proposed, and 6 weeks later, they get married in the house in Idaho. Her parents are barely invited. Only Harker insists that they should go. And you know who's not invited?
Joy.
I was hurt not to be included. It was a confirmation that I was still on the outside somehow. The only reason I could think was my continued devotion to Blue Eyes, a signal that I still had something taking the place of God in my heart. So Blue Eyes doesn't even call her on her 21st birthday. And she's like, I guess it's never going to happen between us. And I was like, well, yeah, because there hasn't been a single sign that it would. So she finally says, you know what? I have to take matters in my own hands.
He also did call her the day after her birthday.
And like apologized and was like, sorry, I'm in law school. I just got carried away.
Which is like not crazy for someone who isn't your boyfriend.
I guess I just am like, what made you think you were going to get married?
So she calls him and goes, what are we doing? If we're not going to get married, I don't know what this is. And he was like, wait, married? They had kissed twice at this point over the course of like
8 years.
8 years of friendship. And she says, if you can't tell me you're at least thinking it's a possibility that we could explore, then I have to let you go. He was quiet. Say something. Fight for me. Love me. Say something. Eventually he did. I don't know what to say. I'm not in a place to make that decision right now. For the next week, I was miserable.
So she finally goes and tells them what happened. And Pam says, I'm so proud of you, Joy. You have let go of the idol that you had put in place of God. I'm so inspired by your faith. And she goes, why don't you come up to Idaho? It's a little God spa up there. It would do you good to just be a kid in a house full of family. Would you like that?
So she goes up there and I think stays for months.
Okay, it's hard to tell if she goes around July 4th and comes back after Christmas or if these are just two separate events. I kind of think they were two separate events.
I hope they were two separate events.
I think she goes for like a week or two and then.
So she goes up to Idaho for the first time and is extremely not impressed by the house. It is in a state of disrepair. And she's like, Pam in LA is such a neat and lovely person. And the fact that her house is in this state of disrepair is like shocking. Les and the boys have been living there for a while now. It seems as if they have been disgusting.
So she's picked up by this girl, Jasmine, who she's never heard of before. And Jasmine, it turns out, is staying at this house. And this house has turned into sort of like a ministry house where Les has this dream of like people coming and living there. And instead of having a church with a house attached, the house is the church. Jasmine's a woman who had come from a Las Vegas trailer park, had 2 disinterested parents, had graduated summa cum laude with a BS in philosophy and a minor in literature. And even though she had extracted herself from her family, she had an escape dysfunction. One night she answered a call from her boyfriend and it turned out he was high on crystal meth. And she left having been completely assaulted and attacked and just feeling down and out and like obviously like looking for answers and alone. Emily, the talent agent from LA, said, why don't you go stay with my friends, the Van Hewitts? They have a house where people can just like get themselves together. So Jasmine was supposed to spend the summer in their home. And she's there and she's like, I've been staying for 6 months. They said I could stay here as long as I need. It's amazing. They just let you do whatever you want. You can think, you can write, you join for family dinners. There's nothing to do here except for like get close with God.
So then she meets the other people who live in the house, including Kurt and Lucy, who are 2 people from Les's previous ministry. So they live in the basement. Gretchen is another person from LA
who fell on hard times or like had never really been doing well. She lives in the house too.
So Gretchen, Jasmine, and Joy are going to be sharing a room.
And Joy is getting kind of freaked out because they keep saying things that suggest that they know all about the LA Bible study, that they know all about Joy. They've been looking forward to meeting all the LA people. And she's like, wow, I've never heard about you guys. Why do you know all about us?
So she gets there the first night. She meets the rest of the gang. There's a guy named Dante who played college football, but then tore his ACL and got so depressed, he went just like around the Pacific Northwest and ended up meeting Les at his old church and then kind of falling under Les's wing. The first night, she has kind of a cough, and Kurt from the basement was like, have a little bit of cough syrup. And she ends up sleeping for almost 48 hours, which is crazy. It turns out to be codeine.
Yeah. She wakes up to a bunch of calls and texts from her parents and her mom is like horrified. She's like, I texted you. I didn't know where you were. And Joy is really like, well, I don't owe you an explanation. And she's like, well, you're my child. And she goes, I'm not a child. And she's like, you're my child.
The more I folded into Les and Pam's world, the more misunderstood by my parents I felt and the less I trusted them.
She says, why is it my responsibility to make you feel better when you're being unreasonable? And she's like, I don't think it's unreasonable for me to be worried about where you are. You owe people a text. And she goes, I'll text you when it's appropriate.
And she's being extremely encouraged by Les this entire time. He's like, you're being very strong in setting your boundaries. You don't owe your parents information.
Later, I would come to see those 2 weeks in Idaho as the turning point. Had I just stayed in LA depressed and mopey over blue eyes, would I have avoided it all? Possibly. But then I wouldn't have had Rosie, her daughter. I think about that every time I tell my story. It was all worth it for her. So she spends the first couple of days, she spends the first 2 days dead asleep, having taken hydrocodone. And then she spends the next couple of days just having a great time by herself, just walking around, writing songs, journaling, bird watching.
And then they start giving her more reading, and she starts learning about manipulation and Jezebels. There are a lot of things that he says differently than any other God study she's done, but because he says them so blasé, it's confident and not dramatic. So she's just I don't know, that must just be a way people talk.
And they have these really intense Wednesday night Bible studies with everybody in the house. And she says they get even more intense and deeper than what they were doing in LA on Saturday nights. One of his big things is fighting against the Jezebel devil spirit. We have to guard our hearts against anything and anyone that makes us doubt what we already know is true. The second thing it does is control and create rebellion.
Another big conversation they have is about spiritual authority and who has spiritual authority over you. If you are in a relationship, the husband has spiritual authority over the wife.
And it becomes clear that Les has spiritual authority over everybody in the house. And Joy goes, what I wish I had asked then is, well, who has spiritual authority over him? I came from a long line of independent, dominant women, and just maybe the Jezebel spirit had already infiltrated my family, my mind. Maybe this is why I could never get on board with the whole submissive wife idea. Was I being attacked by an ancient spirit of control? Was being a woman in submission the key I had been missing all along, the reason Blue Eyes didn't see a future with me?
I was convinced the reason I hadn't found a partner yet was because I hadn't surrendered enough for God to reward me. Mina was able to sacrifice acting, and look how she'd been rewarded. So she and Harker, I believe at this point, are expecting.
Yeah, Minna moves out, and of course she can't afford the 2-bedroom anymore, so she moves into this studio apartment. And the question from this study becomes, well, if what you want is a partner, what are you giving up for God to give it to you? God will reward you with a partner when you've sacrificed enough for him. And so she keeps trying to be well, what else can I give up? And she decides that her apartment should become a secondary Bible study area. And she says, anyone at any time is allowed to come here and worship. I'll have a CD in the CD player. The door's always open. And people start taking her up on it. People are showing up at 6:30 a.m., midnight, just to crash and pray.
Camille comes at one point and talks about a experience she's had where she felt that she saw the devil.
What she describes is almost exactly, what is it, nighttime paralysis? Sleeping paralysis?
Yeah, sleep paralysis demon.
Yeah. She's you don't understand. I woke up in the middle of the night. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. But I saw this scary figure. And I'm this is why you got to talk to other people. I guess this is why the internet's important, because I am actually a lot of people see that.
Yeah. And Joy is not concerned at all. Joy is no, I believe in the spirits coming to us.
So she tells this story about a time she was in New York City, and it was a rainy day. She was loving New York City. She's sitting in a booth at a cafe because it starts raining. And so she hides in this booth, and suddenly everything around her is gray. And she suddenly starts not seeing this romanticized version of New York City. And for a brief moment, she suddenly has this realization. She goes, what if all this Jesus stuff is just nonsense, made up? The Jesus stuff was working for me. I was content overall. I figured worst case scenario, we all convinced ourselves of different things to make life go by easier. So I'd keep on believing. I guess I'll just find out when I die, I thought. And then everything went warm. My heart slowed. My skin suddenly hit a perfect temperature. In the empty cafe, in my booth, someone sat beside me. There was no flesh, no body to touch. There was only a deep and familiar presence of someone who leaned in and spoke tenderly into my ear. The voice was gentle and masculine, joyful and weighty. Never doubt that I am real, I heard. Tears filled my eyes involuntarily. So in that day, she heard God, and he said never to doubt her or never to doubt him.
Maybe her.
No, to her, it's a him. So she's like, listen, the devil, spirits, they're around us. People reason them away, but it happens all the time.
So Les convinces them to spend Christmas in Idaho. And so she calls her parents and is like, yeah, I'm not coming to either of you guys for the holidays. They are upset. Like, the thing is, she had a contentious relationship with her parents, and I think that they did fuck up. But I feel very torn on, like, she did have, like, loving parents that really wanted her there.
But I also get that she's like, but at the same time, these Christmases were with someone else's family, with their extended family. She was like, I don't know, to go to a Christmas with like a second cousin you're meeting for the first time. That's not how I want to spend it. She didn't feel at home anywhere, and I get that.
Yeah, I get that too.
I don't think they prioritized making her feel comfortable.
No, they didn't. And then as soon as she had a place that was specifically prioritizing making her feel comfortable via preying upon her, I like can see how that is quite enticing.
And Les is really separating these people from their families. Emily, for example, who grew up in Idaho, her dad lives just down the street, and he is specifically not invited to Christmas. Les goes, it's the war room. You can't invite everybody to the war room, which is like a weird way to call Christmas.
Yeah.
She has this like kind of beautiful Christmas where they do a secret Santa where you have to make your own gift, and everybody like puts so much heart and thought and time into giving these like handmade beautiful gifts. And there's laughter, and the kitchen's full, and they're having so much fun, and they're doing special prayers for one another. And she finally is like, this is what a family is supposed to feel like. She feels for the first time accepted and loved.
They do then this group prayer that is like an amalgamation of these individual prayers that ends with, release me from the need to fulfill others' expectations of me. Familial patterns no longer dictate who I am. It was, of course, a methodical plan to isolate us from our loved ones. The more we functioned like a family, the easier it was for Les to manipulate us.
One afternoon over that holiday, he started casually using a term I'd never heard before, biofamily. So he starts talking about we can honor our biofamilies without betraying who God called us to be. He says, you're born to a family, but you have to like be in the family that God calls you to, which is our spiritual group here. In order to please God, you must answer this call.
So then she kind of flashes back on some traumas, like physical traumas she's experienced. A bunch of the boys scoop her up in a beanbag, and at first she feels attacked because as a woman in this world, there have been times that she has felt very out of control in situations with men.
Specifically, one of the examples is at an 11 p.m. meeting with director James Toback in his editing bay, naively thinking I was helping him out by meeting him late since he was on a long shoot, only to be paralyzed for an hour listening to him verbally undress me, saying things like, every woman likes to be licked in a different way.
When she realizes that the boys at this house are just like treating her like a sister, suddenly she feels completely released from like fear, and she feels more comfortable than she's ever felt with anyone. Another one of the boys that we forgot to mention is addressed in this book as QB Quiet Boy.
So Les and Marty have 3 sons. She calls 2
the Barbarians
because they're twins and they just like rip shit up and play video games. And then they have an older brother, the Quiet Boy. He is, as described, a few years younger than her, quiet. Unlike everybody else, these 3 boys seem to be allowed to do whatever they want. They're allowed to just sit in the corner, not talk, not participate, and play video games.
And Quiet Boy, when they first meet, definitely has eyes on her, but it never really blossoms into anything.
Mm-hmm. I mean, of course, she's like beautiful. I mean, she's so beautiful. She is about to get cast as a beautiful girl in a teen drama. So when she first sees the script for Ravens, a high school drama, she does not want to do it. She's like, this is just another version of a soap opera. She wants to be a film actress. At this time, it was hard to go between TV and movies.
And she's getting a lot of almost movies. Like, there are a ton of movies that she's the second person for.
She's up against the Katie Holmes, Michelle Williams, Kerry Russell, Natalie
Portman.
Thank you.
Her agent is like, this is a really good opportunity.
She actually does turn it down and ends up getting a pilot written by the Mr. and Mrs. Smith screenwriter, produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. The pilot doesn't go through, and luckily they call last minute being like, listen, is there any chance she'd still be down for this thing? We've renamed it One Tree Hill. We're screen testing right now. We start shooting in 10 days. And her agent is like, come on.
Her agent is like, this is literally for you. They bring her in to read. Then they bring her in for a chemistry test. Her and Chad Michael Murray bounce off of each other like perfect little balloons. she gets the role like in the parking lot. He chases her out after the chemistry test and is like, it's yours.
She says even though she didn't want to show teenagers a bad role model, she was like, this has honesty and grit. She hated those Christian corny shows that doesn't show anything about real life. She's like, this is what it's really like. And that's why you have to tell stories to reflect reality.
So this is so interesting. She had turned down the show What I Like About You.
Because she thought it was irresponsible to be living with a boyfriend out of wedlock.
Yeah, she was going to be the Jenny Garth character. And she was like, I'm not going to just live with my boyfriend in New York City with my sister. So then the producer calls her and is like, if you are going to do this show, you have to know it's about fucking and sucking. And she's like, I understand that I need to portray being godly amongst fucking and sucking.
Yeah, it's really interesting when she can and can't. Because I think if anything, What I Like About You is a way more PG show than One Tree Hill, right?
Can I say One Tree Hill was a show that like I rewatched a couple episodes recently. And I remember even when I was younger being like, what the fuck? I feel like that was the first show that really normalized teenagers having sleepovers. And I was like, this is unrealistic. Like, I know, listen, I was a later virgin. I know that people in my high school were fucking, but they were not just like having unsupervised sleepovers often. That's crazy. I'm sorry.
Doesn't her character get like pregnant as a teen?
Yeah, but she's married. She gets married at 17.
Why?
Claire, that show was insane. Hillary Burton's character, her dad was like some sort of boat job where he'd be gone for months at a time.
So she lived by herself. She was like an unsupervised teenager.
She was like a completely unsupervised teenager, and Lucas would sleep over at her house like every night.
Things were different in One Tree Hill.
Things were so different in One Tree Hill. And she had like a perpetual video camera, a webcam.
Okay, well, that's actually quite prescient. That's literally the premise of iCarly, a universally child-accepted show.
Except for she was just pointing it into her room. And she would like draw in front of a webcam.
Again, I think ahead of her time.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, it was like very unchristian.
Meanwhile, her and Camille are going their separate ways. Camille seems to be less and less invited to events with the Bible study group. Camille had been like searching for her own religion by going to different groups, and she's close with her family. And Camille says to her one time, like, you know, Pam met my mom and they had a weird convo where Pam said to my mom, no, she's my daughter. That's kind of weird to say to somebody's mother, right? That like this random lady is more her mom than you are. Joy is like, no, that's like a normal thing. You must have misunderstood. But she is our mom. She's like, how are you going to say no? Like God put this spiritual mother in front of us and you're going to reject all of her goodness. And Camille is like, I guess, yes. Best of luck to you. We ended lunch with one last hug and went our separate ways. I wouldn't see her again for 2 years.
So she moves down to Wilmington, North Carolina.
And she has the permission of the family, which is what we're calling now the people from Idaho. But it's like not less as much as the two brothers, Ed and Pam. And Ed prays over her and is like, she's so great. Wish her luck. We're really happy for her. Let her enjoy it. And she's like, oh yeah, I was used to being scared to have people pray over me because when Les does it, it's like praying over your faults. So it was nice to hear that people liked me. Anyway, then she moves to North Carolina and throws herself into the role.
And she moves away from everyone else. She doesn't want to be tempted by like the debauchery of party teens / young adults because everyone on the show except for Nathan Scott was like in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So she moves to the beach a little bit away from where everyone else lives and kind of keeps to herself. She spends all of her time just like writing and working. And she is kind of happy. She's like, I don't know, for the most part, it's more creative than I've ever felt.
Yeah, she's really like on the beach. She's working hard. She gets along with almost everybody except for Sophia. And she spends a lot of time in this book talking about how much she regrets it, how much she was like threatened by Sophia, how beautiful Sophia was, how smart and cool, and how it really made her nervous.
So her and Hillary Burton are Lord and Savior.
My spiritual leader.
The god of this podcast. They have like a good relationship because they're both kind of wacky. They both like collecting weird shit. And so I think they're able to communicate on like a slightly more chill level where they can just like give each other sweet presents. She learns about 3 other Christians. One guy drives her to and from the airport, and then 2 of the makeup ladies are Christians. She's like, okay, well, they're safe people. And she has this experience where she starts talking to her driver about strategies for deflecting demonic attacks from Jezebel and dismantling religious structures. They just looked at me strangely. If Christians in a small southern town weren't ready to dive in that deep, there was no way my co-stars would. Oh, yeah. I have to say, Ay, 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 ay.
If fellow Christians are looking at you and being like, I don't know if that's right.
I guess the problem is she's never really interacted normally in a group. Like in high school, she had no friends.
Yeah.
I feel like she's not used to the fact that, like, for the most part, people are kind of normal. People on set were like a little confused by her Idaho family. For the holidays and for breaks, she would always go to Idaho and they'd be like, so you're from Idaho? And she was like, no, my family lives in California and Jersey, but I've got my people in Idaho. And they were like, okay.
Keeping my inner life a secret only added to my loneliness.
So then Emily comes out to visit her. Every now and then some people from the family will come visit her. And Emily tells her that she's moving to Idaho.
And quitting her job.
And Bethany is like, you worked really hard as a talent manager.
And she's like, yeah, but I've been talking to Les and Pam, and I realized what I really want to be is a wife and a mom. And staying in LA is only advancing my career. I want to take a leap of faith and show God that I'm ready for the next step. I really don't think I'm going to meet anyone in LA.
So she's like, well, what does your mom think? And her mom goes, that Jezebel spirit is coming out strong. She literally tried to ship me off to relatives in Sweden. The closer I get to the Lord, the more she freaks out because she can't control me anymore. So they are under this less invented belief that anyone who is concerned for you that isn't him is obsessive and controlling.
But he's not. He's just God. And so she's like, okay, but what are you going to do for a job? And she's like, oh my God, I forgot to tell you, Les is buying a hotel. I'm going to manage it.
So then Les comes out to visit and he's like, yeah, we're buying a hotel and you could be an investor. And she's like, okay, maybe. He shows her a brochure and it's a garbage dump of a motel. And she's like, well, that's a motel. And he's like, oh, snobby actress over here. And she's like, no, it's just like different types of buildings that are different. And he was like, okay, well, I guess you don't really want to be a part of getting closer to God and being a part of our community.
He also reminds her that it's not a woman's job to counsel or correct a man. So if he says it's a hotel, it's a hotel.
Yeah. And he's like, how much do you make on One Tree Hill? And she's like, some money, but we might get canceled. So then I'll have no money.
I will say she was making a shit ton of money right out the gate.
Yeah.
She's making $45,000 an episode and they were doing 22 episodes a year.
Yeah. And she's like, but we could get canceled. And he's like, right, but you have a contract for a certain amount, right? And she's like, right.
And so I will say they only asked for $10,000. And considering she just essentially said she's 25 and making $1 million a year, I am like, 10K? What's 10K?
What's 10K?
But she also does share this. If we don't get canceled, which the producers always tell us we're about to be, we knew that the show had been gaining a steady audience. But being in Wilmington in those days before social media, we were so far removed from pop culture, we didn't know how well we were actually doing. I now believe this was strategic on the part of our show creator and network execs, an effort to keep us from getting inflated egos, becoming too assertive, or most crucially, banding together to renegotiate our contracts as a group. They would tell us for the next 8 seasons we're about to get canceled. I just think it's interesting that, like, because I had also heard this from their podcast too, and she talks about it a little bit later in the book. But I know this is a big thing that Hillary and Sophia talk about, like how kind of abusive and toxic the producers of One Tree Hill was to the women on set. So I can't believe that, like, in all angles, nobody was there for her.
I know. It was so interesting that we didn't even get into the Josh Schwartz of it all because she was, like, being so heavily abused
Elsewhere
than that it's like, I don't know, man. Some guy who works with teenage girls in Hollywood is a perv. Yeah.
She knows that. That's why she founded Better Family with a dad who doesn't let her do anything.
The possibility of owning a hotel wasn't my dream, but facilitating a ministry that would help people was. So she calls her financial advisors in New York to talk about investing in this hotel. And they were like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And she's like, right, but I want to. And they were like, as long as you know that it is mind-numbingly a bad idea, don't do it. Our official advice on every front is absolutely don't. And she goes, sure, send the check.
Dante's mom had put in $75,000. And I have to say, I was like, no, Dante's mom, let her out of this.
That's so mean.
So over the next couple months, they're sending her like weekly emails, giving her updates with how it's going. But she's also so busy with work that they kind of move on without her. This is also where she gets into the trouble of her ADD. And she gives an example like, sometimes I'd be in a scene and there'd be a pie and I'd say, why is a pie here? And they'd say, I don't know, you're baking a pie. And she'd be like, but I'm busy all day. And they go, well, maybe you bought it. And she goes, okay, well then why is it steaming? And she's like, see, ADD. And I'm like, these seem like valid questions.
Yeah, it's also things that I'm like, they also just kind of don't matter and you could have just let it go.
But I also am like, this is not enough to have a 1-minute conversation about a prop is not like a disability. She's like, you don't understand. I had a mental disability. If things seemed inconsistent, I asked about it.
Well, then her later thing makes much more sense when she's arguing about this pie. What I didn't realize was that I'd been doing so much compromising of myself on microscopic increments with less that subconsciously I was grasping for control in any way I could get it, like arguing about pie. That makes sense.
That makes sense. And also what makes more sense is the pie thing is an example of how she was considered difficult on set. But it turns out what that was really about was the fact that they were always trying to get photos of her essentially naked for the producers. And whenever she would fight back, they'd be like, you're being difficult.
Yeah.
You're allowed to ask about pie. I mean, she went on to direct episodes.
Yeah. Whenever they would try to have her in anything remotely risque, she would be like, that literally doesn't make any sense for my character. And then they would call her difficult. It didn't. I'm sorry.
It would be like, you have to try on 9 bras and we're going to send Polaroids to the producer and see which one he likes best.
And she was like, no. Her character is Tudor Girl. Oh, also, this is crazy. Whenever the creator of the show would get mad at her for being difficult about wardrobe or pie, they would like bully her in the script by having other characters call her character like fat and annoying.
She also says, in hindsight, it became clear that both Les and the producer used geography to isolate us young and trusting people away from our support systems and pressure us into doing whatever they wanted.
Even though both Les and Pam stressed that no one in Wilmington was spiritually safe for me to trust, I started to enjoy the company of my co-stars. So she was feeling very isolated because she lived far away from everyone. And then she just started kind of talking to people and being like, I don't know, we could talk about books and other things. So she moves closer into town so she can spend more time with her co-stars. And Les finds out and is like, why didn't you talk to us first? And she was like, I didn't know that I had to. And she's starting to feel independent and happy and strong. And he goes, okay, well, when you're home for the holidays, we'll do a meeting. And she starts freaking out because like, what the fuck is a meeting? And now she can't not spend the holidays with them because she has this important meeting, even though she's starting to kind of realize that she hasn't seen her parents in a long time and maybe she should go spend time with them. She just is too busy between shooting One Tree Hill and now going back to the house in Idaho whenever she has time because she's starting to feel disconnected with everyone. So she goes home and sees the motel for the first time. Everyone's working on it. Dante is in charge of maintenance. Like everyone in the family has a job with the motel. And it is like awful. No matter which way you paint it, every time someone sees it for the first time, they're just like, Jesus fucking Christ. That sucks.
But they like have everyone so well groomed. So Emily is the manager and she starts telling Joy, I made a decision about the towels the other day and how they should be folded based on what I'd seen other hotels do. And Kurt and Les told me I was like wrong and stupid. And at first it kind of hurt my feelings, but you know what? They're so right. I don't even want to be running a hotel. That's too much responsibility. So I'm so grateful to them.
That was how well Les and Pam and the other leaders had trained us, conditioned us, groomed us. As soon as we started complaining, no matter how justifiably, we caught ourselves, chastised ourselves for being negative and spoiled and ungrateful and turned it into a blessing, an opportunity for learning and growth. I feel like this book stayed engrossing, but this was the part where I kind of got like, Jesus Christ, when does it end?
Mm-hmm.
So she's going back between her breaks and like Les is just unhinged. He's always saying stuff like men are for war and women are for taking care of men. The first time she notices QB has any sort of feelings or existence is when I guess he got mad and punched a hole through a door and everyone was like, that's crazy and really impressive that he's so intense.
So they have this Christmas where Dante's mother is supposed to come stay with them, Esther. She comes, she's sweet. She kind of has this weird comment about her body type and how big her boobs are. And I am like, Joy is pretty vain, to be honest. Like every single character in this book is introduced with whether or not they're hot.
Very Rob Lowe.
I know. It really does give you an insight into how insecure her psyche was. And I guess that is why you can't let your kids be a child actor because it puts too much weight on unimportant stuff. So not only is she coming to be with her son, obviously, she's coming also to check on her investment. She hasn't met anybody or even seen the hotel motel. And she's also coming to meet her soon-to-be daughter-in-law, Jasmine.
So Dante and Jasmine have gotten engaged. And this is very hard on Joy because she's watching everyone in the house get paired off. She mentions a couple times that she thought Dante was hot, but there was no real vibe between them.
She has a real crush on Dante, and Dante used to be a football player. So every time she meets somebody at all athletic, she's like, he reminded me of Dante. I'm like, okay, those are just like muscular shoulders. Anybody with muscular shoulders, she's like very Dante-esque.
She's very like sad about the fact that Abe and Quiet Boy are the only two single guys left because she's trying to date. Everyone on set has like a relationship. Everyone in the house now is starting to pair off into relationships. She knows that like if she doesn't date someone from the family, it's really hard to find a relationship because first of all, she's in Wilmington.
And second of all, it's like most Christians aren't even the right Christians.
Yeah, most Christians hear her talk about Jezebels and they're like, yeesh. So she is just like, I don't know if I'm just going to die alone. Like, when do I get to have my husband? Like, what else do I have to sacrifice to God for him to give me love?
So it's Christmas morning and she wakes up early because she's a bit jet lagged, and she tiptoes into the kitchen and she overhears two men talking in the dark, and it's Kurt and Les. And they start talking about how everybody's only loyal to someone because he's so impressive and smart and good looking. And this is, of course, Harker. And then they start talking about Minna, his wife. And they're like, she's not very credible right now with the whole postpartum stuff. I'm not too worried about her. I know we're calling it postpartum, but honestly, I think she might be bipolar, Les said. And they start talking about how hard it is because like Harker has to be put down. He's asking questions and they have to like remove him from the group. That kind of independence can open a door and give the enemy a foothold.
She just acts like she never heard it, but she becomes suspicious of Harker and Mina because she's like, well, if Mina's bipolar, I don't even know if I can trust her.
I'm like, what do you mean Harker is the enemy? He also says something suspicious, which is, don't forget, Kurt, there's only one reason you're here. Dun, dun, dun.
Spooky.
They're having Christmas. They're exchanging gifts. Esther is nowhere to be seen. And it turns out she was uninvited. And Les was like, good job, Dante, recognizing that this was like an inner circle only situation.
It's not clear if she was uninvited. There is a weird exchange with Esther where she sees the hotel that she invested in for the first time, $75,000, and kind of freaks out. And the house is like not entirely privy to the interaction, but she packs her stuff and leaves. So it seems that she thought she invested in something better. So then she has her big meeting in the basement with the prayer group that was selected to oversee her problems. And she's like, I don't actually know why we're having this meeting, because she's like, my life is good. I'm actually quite happy on set right now. I'm making friends. I feel creative. I feel good. So she starts coming up with stuff for like why she needed the meeting. And she said the problem is that the more comfortable I get there, the further I feel from you guys here. And you're my family. And I don't want that to happen. And they spend the next couple of hours going in about what her problems are really, and why she might feel distance from them and from God because she's sinful.
He says, I couldn't help noticing that in your journal, there seems to be a lot of self-focus in that entry. Maybe it's just that one. I don't know. Are most of your entries like that? And she's like, my journal entries, are most of them about me? Yeah. And they're like, well, that's your problem. You're not even thinking about the family. And they say you have to stop asking yourself illegal questions, thoughts you can no longer allow in, like wondering if you belong in this family. And it finally ends with Les saying, I just find the timing extremely convenient that while you're in a season of budding success, you also happen to be unable to make time for the people who you know will hold you accountable. I'm just not buying it. So of course she leaves, quick to forget the truth about herself. She's lost all of her like advancements she's made in finding her own freedom and independence by moving closer to the cast. And she retreats again. And she like is like, I have to be making more time for the family. I have to be traveling home as much as I can. I have to be reconnecting.
She also finds out that she's famous. Mm-hmm. So the cast does TRL and people are like obsessed with them. And she's like, oh my God, it turns out people are really watching that show.
And she's like, it really sounded like competition between the women. And it was hard because none of us knew how to go this path of fame. And she's like, I feel like I couldn't confide in anybody because I can't take advice from a non-Christian. But I also was like, nobody in the family really understands this kind of fame. So she was just dealing with it alone.
So then she meets this guy in Myrtle Beach when the show does like a little adventure abroad to a different beach. And she meets this guy, Ben, who she decides to be in love with. They go to Idaho for the weekend and nobody really likes him because he's like not from the family and probably would have been like, what the fuck is this? If he had gotten to know them better. She ends up engaged to Ben. And then as soon as like the family calls with their take on the situation, she breaks up with Ben. And everyone on set is like, wait, so you guys were engaged and then he met your family and now you're not engaged? Are you okay? And she was just like, none of your business.
It was around this time that the real whispers began. After Ben, I felt more dejected about my ability to make wise decisions. So I started leaning on Les and Pam for more and more advice, not only in my personal life, but my career. So even though they don't know anything, she's like, maybe that's actually what makes them such good decision makers because they don't know anything about the entertainment industry. So they're making like the most unbiased decision. Because you know how like a lack of knowledge actually kind of gives you a 50-50 chance, except for that a career is like infinite possibilities. So it's like a 1 in an infinite chance you'll get it right.
Yeah. People always say everything's just a flip of a coin and there's no such thing as an informed decision.
So they start being like, well, now that we have a hotel and now that we're taking you on and they were taking on Harker's acting career and Abe's music business. They were like, we should start a whole new asset company called Triad, Trinity Redemption Investment and Asset Directors. So she takes all of her money out of this like fancy, successful management firm in New York and gives them everything.
To manage carefully.
And to invest in stuff.
Yeah. She sings on One Tree Hill, and so do a couple of the other people. And there's this like One Tree Hill tour. She goes on tour, and Pam comes to one of the shows and meets some of her co-stars. And Paul, who's like her best friend on the set, who plays Dan Scott, the dad, which is weird that her best friend is the dad, but whatever, man. Paul goes, wow, she's very careful with her words. And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, she just seems controlled. She's like, okay, weird. And then this other guy who's on the show who also does a lot of singing and she's very close with, this guy Tyler, starts kind of distancing himself from her. And she's like, why won't you talk to me? And he's like, oh, people are saying you're in a cult. And she's like, that's super weird. And I'm not. Then
this is so sad.
This is the saddest story in the book, except for the abusive relationship and all of her money.
So her dream was to be Beauty and the Beast. She loves that musical. She loves Broadway. It was obviously her dream to be on Broadway, but she's always like related to Belle. And because of the success of One Tree Hill, she gets an offer to be Beauty on Broadway. And it's her dream. She's giddy. She practices the songs. And as soon as she gets offered the role, the first person she tells is her hair and makeup team and then her bio parents. And she knows, she's like, isn't it interesting that those are my first two calls? But she's like, I don't know. My parents have been there with me since the beginning of this dream. Like, they're the ones who nurtured it in me. And then she like has to be honest with herself that part of why she didn't call Les right away is she's scared of what he's going to say. So he calls her. And of course, he says exactly what you think. He goes, are you sure? It's worth considering this might be a tactic of the enemy to keep you from your inheritance as a child of God, your spiritual inheritance of pressing into family and finding out what it feels like to be a part of heaven on earth. And he essentially says, yeah, this will be good for your career, but is your career more important than family? Because you're going to lose your family. And she's like, I can't pick career over family. It felt shallow to even consider. The answer had to be family. I wanted a family longer than I'd wanted Broadway. Family was the bigger dream. If I let go of Blue Eyes, I could let go of this. And I think this is the question I have that I like need her to go more in depth on is like, how bad was your fucking family life?
Yeah.
You would want to be on Broadway since you were like 6 or something. You're saying since before the age of 6, you felt like you had no family?
It's really tough stuff. I mean, we need to talk more about my assessment of her family at the end of the book once all this stuff comes together, but it is so devastating. Les is like, I'll give you some time to think about it, and then effectively tells everyone to like not respond to her calls or texts while she's thinking about it. I mean, she doesn't have proof of this, but no one responds to her calls or texts while she's thinking about it. So she gets into this headspace that if she takes Broadway, then no one will ever talk to her again from her family. And this is, first of all, she hasn't made friends on set because she's been completely reliant on the family. She doesn't really have friends in LA because all of her LA friends were that Bible study group that's now mostly based out of Idaho and a part of the family. She has not spent 2 Christmases with her parents. Like, she's really cut her bio family out. And I can see how at 25, you'd be like, well, why would they forgive me?
Or like, I don't even think she wanted their forgiveness. Like, they were no longer the people whose approval she was seeking out.
They've really done a successful job of completely alienating her from everyone in the world.
There also is this huge focus on like being a child in God's eyes so you can relive your childhood and like re-child yourself. And it's interesting because I feel like most adults, like everybody wants approval from their parents, but I think as you get older, like you find yourself and make your independent choices. But they really effectively put her back in the body of like an 8-year-old who needs her parents' approval, and now they're her parents.
So she says no to Beauty and the Beast on Broadway, and her agents, her managers, her friends, like everyone, even other people in the family are like, what the fuck are you doing? She talks to Mina the next day, and Mina's like, I would have still been your friend. She's like, well, that's too late now. Les said I couldn't, so I didn't. It was like one of the sadder things she said no to. Just, I mean, the person who did end up doing Beauty and the Beast got a lot of amazing opportunities from it.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, the way that like she doesn't do other projects throughout the show for the most part, because whenever she's off from One Tree Hill, she just goes to Idaho. I do think that that like makes a huge difference in where she is now in the entertainment industry.
You know what we have to watch for the Patreon?
What?
That like 7 Pillars show or something. That documentary about that TikToker who ended up in a cult.
Oh, is that the one with the dancing cult?
Right. I feel like that's probably a very similar story to this.
Yeah.
I do get how it happens to people in the industry, though. It's so alienating and isolating to feel like nobody has your back and everybody is saying no. To feel like one person believes in you is so important.
Yeah. So then there was this whole drama with the motel where Emily is demoted from manager to assistant manager. And there's obvious stress between Mina and Harker and the rest of the family.
So Mina's now on her second baby. And because money's so tight, they've like made her sell her car. And they're really like taking things away from the inner sanctum people. And Ed, who's Pam's husband, Harker's father, is starting to get like a bit pissed off. He's like, listen, you don't fucking give my son and his wife and my grandchild a lemon of a car where she keeps getting ditched at the side of the road. Like they have a problem where their car keeps breaking down and now she's pregnant with a baby on the side of the road often. And they're being told to appreciate the privilege of learning what it's like to be less fortunate. And he's like, no. Don't fucking ditch my grandchild on the side of the road. And then Ed gets admonished for getting involved with Les's teachings. So things are starting to crack. Like Ed is a bit pissed, but he seems very deferent to Pam, which is an interesting inversion of the Bible.
Les's teachings, which is men is warrior, women is dummy.
Ed, as a general practitioner, would see patients for mental health visits and then send the patients to talk for an hour with Les and Pam. So one of the weird things is Les is like not an accredited
anything.
So technically like the nonprofit status is weird. And then Pam was like the administrator for Ed's doctor practice. So like they were like scamming the system somehow and getting him paid insurance money. And nobody really knows how because he wasn't accredited, but that's what they were doing. That's how they were making money. And of course, now everybody was signing up for one-on-one individual counseling sessions with Les.
They also start doing this like lecture series at the conference room at the motel. And this woman shows up named Danielle who like found out about the family and the church through One Tree Hill message boards where there are rumors that Joy is a member of this religious cult.
It's so interesting to think about her concerns about being a role model as a good Christian girl. And meanwhile, literally her fame
is like leading people into a cult.
It's so dangerous. I know she didn't mean to, but I feel like if I accidentally got somebody stuck in a cult, I would feel so fucking guilty. Just because I wanted a boyfriend. Imagine you want a boyfriend so bad you get like people who like you stuck in a cult.
That'd be a bummer.
Worms?
Don't join a cult for me. Join a cult for
yourself. It only works if you're going to do it for yourself.
Okay, so Dante also got in trouble because he was looking at porn on the motel office computer and they decided he was a porn addict. And so he got kicked out of the family.
Which is crazy because he had been living there and like working unpaid for years. And his mom was the core investor. Like, I mean, Dante had given a lot to this club and a little bit of wanking off. And he lost his fiance and his place to live. And they were like, you know what, Jasmine, we'll tell you when he's healed and then you can get married then.
Good news.
He's healed pretty quick, 6 months.
6 months it takes to cure a porn addiction. And then Abe and Emily get together and she's like, okay, so what the fuck do I do now? And next time she's at the house, she goes, you know what? QB is cute.
That's the son, Quiet Boy, who's a few years younger and had like not said anything yet. And I think even Les was like, I cannot believe what just got lobbed into my glove. I like cannot believe.
He's like, I can't believe the most successful one wants to marry my son. And the only reason I didn't suggest it is because I thought, what kind of knob would fall for this?
Like literally, he's like, yeah, I guess now that you say it, you find him attractive? Yeah, he's attractive. He cannot believe that the millionaire. And he's like, yeah, we'll set it up. And so the next day, QB, and she's like, no, I don't even like him. I'm probably just desperate and lonely. And he's like, how could you be desperate and lonely? You're the star of a hit TV show. Every boy on earth would love to date you. And if you want my son, that comes from a place of godliness.
So they start dating.
And immediately she's like, wow, we have nothing in common. I love to travel and I love words and art. And he thinks all that stuff is stupid and he doesn't know anything and he doesn't talk. And I'm physically unattracted to him and we don't like each other. Listen, that's no match for what you think God's saying.
And then he proposes and she's like, for the love of God, don't do that. Don't propose. And then he goes, no, I proposed. And so then she goes for a walk and she goes, okay, if I don't marry him, then I won't be in this family anymore because they'll be mad at me. And so I have to marry him. And she asks God for a sign. God says, if you do marry him, eventually things will be fine. The exact quote is, if you choose this, I will make it good. So she marries him. And everyone is like, what are you doing?
Even the family. Even the family, Minna and Harker, are like, listen, we don't really get why you would be with him. Are you sure you want to do it? In a world where I could have done things differently and my daughter would still exist, I wish I had grabbed them both by the collars and said, save me. Get me the hell out of here. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I was too proud. I absolutely hated giving someone else the satisfaction of knowing that I'd made a mistake and they were right all along. In my asinine, unreasonable pride, I smiled and reassured them that everything was fine.
So then she talks to Pam and she's like, I don't think I really love him. And Pam is like, no, you do. You gave up Beauty and the Beast for love and now you're engaged. And she's like, right, but I'm saying I'm not in love. And Pam's like, nope, you are.
Yeah. And then Les hears that she's showing doubts and he's like, don't you dare talk about this to anybody. The only person that really should be involved in your relationship is me, your pastor / father-in-law. I'm the only person who should tell you what to do with my son. And then he actually gives her this piece of advice and I'm like, fuck. I think there's a point in my life that this really would have worked on. Like, it doesn't not make sense in the world that we live in. He goes, anyone could marry anyone. Compatibility is made up. People are always changing. If you're not compatible now, you will be in 5 years. Then you won't be again. Then you will be. It doesn't matter who you choose. You're still bringing yourself into any relationship and you're the one you get to work on. So it really does come down to if you're ready to work on yourself or not. Marriage only functions as the container for growth. Attracted, not attracted. You just pick someone and let God be in charge of making it work. Can I tell you, I almost was like, I could see that. And I was thinking about him being like, listen, things come and go. So they're go now, but they'll become later. I was like, yeah, sure.
Why not?
Because people who are in love fall out of love. So why can't people who were never in love fall in? I don't know.
That's a really good point.
Everything is cyclical.
Everyone could be your husband.
This is just the dark side of the moon. You see the dark side eventually. It turns monthly, I think.
Yeah. Every now and then the moon flips on its bum for a Saturn return. 27 years. If you don't like your husband now, check back. Oh my God, how often does our DNA shift? Like every 7 years?
Yeah. Like if you're a completely different person in 7 years, that person might really like whoever he ends up being too.
Also, if you're eating kiwis and your DNA is like...
Yeah. No, that would actually make it worse.
Oh, that's preserving your DNA.
Yeah, that's like repairing the DNA.
Oh,
if
so
anything...
Can I say, if you're very in love now, eat a lot of kiwis so you stay the same person.
And if you're married to someone you hate, no kiwis. No kiwis and I think a lot of like exfoliation. You'll be different and in love soon.
Slough off those layers. They'll regenerate into something you might like.
Get down to a version of yourself that doesn't think he's so bad. Love advice from Claire, Ashley, and Les.
So she does the marriage thing where she adds Q's name to all of her bank accounts. They become joint bank accounts. She also buys a house where he can live, and then they get married. I felt absolutely nothing. Her mom was a guest at her wedding, but Pam played the role of like a motherly figure. So her mom was like strictly just a guest at the wedding. No special honors. Pam didn't even speak to the mom.
It was also really cold. Everybody was cold the whole time and she had to get married in that ugly motel. It's crazy to think she was like, imagine if Sydney Sweeney right now got married in like a motel with no heat to like a guy she didn't even want to fuck. And then their honeymoon was in Colorado and they came up with this idea because they got a good deal on the hotel where Kobe Bryant had been accused of rape the year before. They were like having a hard time filling rooms.
He set up a surprise honeymoon. She had no idea where they were going. They got to the airport in Idaho and flew to Colorado.
And she's like, I hate being cold. I can't ski. And he goes, well, it doesn't matter. We're going to be in the room the whole time anyway.
Because now we're husband and wife, so we can pork.
Les had raised his sons to believe that the best thing about marriage was sex. I couldn't understand why sex made me feel so sad.
In fairness, QB was probably just as nervous and disappointed as me. I'd hoped sex would bring us closer and produce the chemistry I wanted, but all it did was drive us further apart. And this is why I do not believe in no sex before marriage. I really think that there is this weird vibe where people think like, oh, marriage is like a casual acquaintanceship. And then once you start banging, you love each other. Absolutely not true.
Well, even if you are people who are in love and like take your time, I think to have sex be this thing that's like so off limits, so evil, so disgusting, and so much of our identity is tied up in not doing it. There's no way that in the span of like 3 hours, you can completely 180 your brain about it.
Yeah.
There's no way you're not gonna have complicated, fucked up like relationship, not just to sex, but to yourself and like who you are now. If your value for most of your life was not doing something, how do you switch it to doing it? Like if you were never allowed to have dessert growing up because you grew up in an almond mom household, like you're not going to get out of that household and have a normal relationship to sugar.
And so then they encounter this issue where now she feels like all she is to him is a body she's like, I was supposed to fulfill this blow up doll fantasy, which was not who we were at all.
Also, nothing she does he likes. She's trying to be silly. She's trying to be fun. Everything I did, no matter how benign, created some reaction. I had no idea how bad it would get or how exhausted and emotionally stripped I would become. But it was immediately and abundantly clear this whole arrangement was the worst decision I'd ever made.
So finally, she talks to Mina and Harker about it. And she comes to this realization. She goes, okay, we have nothing in common. We don't like each other and we're not even attracted to each other. This was a wrong choice, but I don't want to get divorced because that's also wrong. So what we have to do is admit to each other that we don't like each other and we're completely wrong for each other and see what kind of foundation and relationship we can build from this honest base.
Because he moved with her to Wilmington because he doesn't have a job. He's never done anything in his life. And obviously she's like making literally $1 million a year.
So he gets home to their house in Wilmington and she's like, hey, so I just talked to Harker and Mina and I've come to a realization. And he was like, what the fuck do you mean you talked to Harker and Mina? And they got into a huge fight about the fact that she talked to someone else about their relationship. And he's like, you can't talk to other men about our relationship. And she's like, well, I was talking to my friends about our relationship. And he starts freaking out about how she won't obey his honor. He's bossing her around. He said, why won't you just obey me? And she was like, what? What are you talking about? And so then he moves back to Idaho. And this creates something that she realizes now as a extended version of their relationship, because she's like, if we had just stayed together in the same house, I would have realized how much I can't stand him much earlier and how like untenable the situation was. But instead, I was only seeing him every couple weeks. So when you're fine and then feeling tortured and then fine and then feeling tortured, there are scientific studies that that's actually worse torture. And I'm like, wow, that is a tough way to talk about
your marriage.
In
the meantime, she's getting all of these opportunities. And he uses this phrase in unity to control her. So whenever she wants to do a movie, like this audition, that, and he goes, well, I don't think it's a good idea. And she's like, well, I do. And he goes, well, we should make decisions in unity, which means you have to obey me. At one point, he accidentally says that word out loud. He goes, you need to obey me. And she kind of laughs at the ridiculousness of it all. And of course, he gets mad at that. But she is starting to be like, oh no, I've made a huge mistake. She's seeing the signs. That's how it always is. The second generation botches it for the first generation. Nepo baby. He's a Nepo baby cult leader.
Yeah.
And so he's not good at it.
And she's like, he just has no charisma that he can control me with.
She literally is like, at least Les was like ambitious. He wouldn't even mow the lawn. He didn't want to do anything.
So they create this version of a world where she is, at this point, bankrolling most of the family, I think, because her money is a joint bank account with Q and also controlled by the triad. And so she's like not really allowed to spend her money on anything she wants to spend it on. Her own house, like one time they get into a fight because she comes home for a break and like the house that she bought that he's living in Idaho is disgusting. And she's like, why doesn't anyone in this family fucking clean?
So he's home and she starts working on this Broadway rendition of The Notebook, and she writes all the music and she produces it and she gets the rights from Nicholas Sparks and she puts on a play. And the whole time she's having to like run interference between the family and the actors. And in Hollywood, it is getting out that she is part of a cult and she's becoming kind of like persona non grata. Nobody really wants to work with her. It's making people nervous.
Can I say the other big thing that her agent says about her cult rumors is that dealing with her husband is annoying.
So she gets straight up dropped from her record deal at Epic because they're like, we signed you, not him. And she goes, yeah, but we have to make decisions in unity. He goes, well, that might work for you, but it doesn't work for us. So like they are actively making horrible decisions. They're asking questions and she's not able to procure the rights to the Broadway production, even though people would produce it for Broadway. So this dream she's had that she's like enacted. I mean, what's really heartbreaking is it seems like how much talent she had and how much ambition and how much work she actually put into things. I mean, she was so successful. To like write an entire musical is a lot of work, let alone to get people interested in producing it and have that all undermined by your like freaky cult family.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff like the musical, The Beauty and the Beast, the movies that she wasn't allowed to do because they didn't seem right for her godliness. Like there are a lot of projects that I'm just like, God damn, it sucks to be like, what could have been? And most people like Portia Rossi was never going to be a lawyer, but like what could have been, you know?
And she just is going numb. So, of course, the hotel motel gets foreclosed on. And they're like, bad news. That dream was said no to by God. I'm like, no, it was said no to because you guys couldn't run a business.
Also, you bought a disgusting business.
But we have a new dream, and that's owning a restaurant. And this was based on the fact that Les was obsessed with The Sopranos and he wanted a place for them to all hang out like he was Tony Soprano. So he's like, good news. We're going to take your investment and roll it over into a new investment.
She was just like, I don't know, man. Why not? Let's just do it. Whatever. She's at this point where she has been like kind of just bullied into submission. Everything she says is so wrong that like she just doesn't know how to argue anymore.
The more I complied, the more numb I became and the easier things got. I found out that when the numbness lasts for long enough, it bears a striking resemblance to peace. By 2010, I thought the lack of constant external conflict meant that Quiet Boy and I were doing well enough to try to have a baby. It was pure delusion. I've never been less healthy and happier further from God. It was hell.
Her contract is also up with One Tree Hill, and a couple people are leaving the show. Chad and Hillary are leaving, and she's also just ready to be done.
Well, she was told by Les to leave because they're like, you need to come home and be here more.
And then the show wants her to stay, so they just start offering her more and more money. And Les is like, actually, no, God says your season is not done.
I just heard God said that's like the right number. God is negotiating.
So then she gets called into a basement meeting. And also she'd been having basement meetings a lot because
so bad and so sinful.
She gets called into a basement meeting, and it turns out Gretchen, who's been managing the business, has a gambling problem and has just been like taking money and gambling, which aside from the fact that all of these businesses are losing a fuck ton of money, like also she's just been spending the money.
And she is expected to just full on accept her apology and forgive her. That's the godly ththing to do. And she watches Quiet Boy just go, that's okay, I forgive you. And she's like, you forgive her? It's not your money. I earned that money.
Yeah, Quiet Boy's never worked a day in his fucking life.
And she's like, how is it that every little infraction I do, if I wear the wrong sweatshirt that's too sexy, you scream at me and punch a wall? But if she gambles hundreds of thousands of dollars of my money away, you're like, it's no big deal.
One time she tried to go to dinner in sweatpants and a tank top, and he said soft pants will make men think that they're comfortable with you because that's what you would wear to watch TV at home, and it will make men think sinful thoughts, so you can't wear them to the pizza parlor in Idaho.
So things are really bad. She gets pregnant. The metal laundry basket incident happened when I was 6 months pregnant. Who knows what we were fighting about, but he threw it, and then he breaks all of the potted plants on the way out. She calls Emily, and Emily comes over and is like, are you okay? I'm going to take you to the hospital.
Yeah, because she ends up having Braxton Hicks contractions because of the stress from being abused.
So Rosie's born in Wilmington, and she says it actually was a really beautiful birth. Les came and prayed over the baby, and all the nurses were like, what a great man. And she said that Quiet Boy really was like a great partner throughout all of it. And she had like a great experience. And then he came to Wilmington to watch the baby. She was nursing, and I guess Rosie had like a not detached tongue. So nursing was incredibly painful physically for her for months. And he would watch the baby in the trailer so that she could nurse the baby. But then after a few weeks, he goes, I'm not a babysitter. I'm leaving, and we're getting a nanny. And he's like, I have to do restaurant work. And she's like, restaurant work? You're in Wilmington, North Carolina. What could you be doing in an Idaho restaurant?
The show starts to wrap up. The final season is filming. She has a baby. She feels extra sad about the show ending because she was actually enjoying the reprieve of being in Wilmington most of the time.
After the baby, all of the cast came and gave her these really thoughtful gifts. And she had this moment of realizing like, oh, I'm not the victim who was ostracized. I'm somebody who like alienated myself from outstretched open arms. Like she realized like these people don't hate me. They love me. And I've just been rejecting them. And then meanwhile, she's getting reports back from this restaurant that she bought in Idaho about what a failure it is, how abusive it is, how the money doesn't make sense, how everyone's getting yelled at and it's falling apart.
So Jasmine, who's married to Dante now and has 2 kids with him, Dante's the porn addict. It turns out right before their wedding, Dante had cheated on her, and Les said, living with the shame is your punishment. Don't tell Jasmine.
Yeah, because he had promised Dante that he would find him a wife and nothing was going to get in the way of what God had ordained. Joy, I didn't even tell you what happened when I went to tell them about the porn stuff. They said it's not a woman's place to hold a man accountable. And she goes, they trapped me into this. I was supposed to be here temporarily and then transfer to Stanford, but Pop convinced me I needed to stay and learn and be a part of the family first. Jasmine had been given the exact same speech that Joy had been given. Like, well, you can't go on with your life until you learn how to be part of a family. Like, that's what God wants from you. So you have to stay here. And so she goes to QB and is like, isn't it weird that your dad gave both of us the same speech? And he goes, no, you both have the same problem. You had no family.
So she is starting to realize that things are suspicious. And then
she gets an email from Harker and Minna saying that they're leaving the church. They've been doing research themselves. They still love everybody and want to stay friends, but they're going to become the historical Orthodox. Sure. And so then, of course, everybody's like, well, we can never talk to them again. And she's like, why? Like, we love them. They were our best friends for 10 years. I'm here because of Minna. We lived with them for like a decade. Just because they're going to a different church, we can't be friends. And everybody's like, no, they're evil.
So another important part is that once the baby was born, her real mom comes to stay with her for a bit and is like lovely and asks a couple questions about the family, but it doesn't like pry, isn't weird about it. And she's like, I don't know. I started to realize maybe I could trust my mom.
So meanwhile, things at the house are going bad. Like the Harker and Minna thing is just like a bigger fracture of this hairline problem. Abe is also having health problems. His like retina keeps detaching and they're worried that he could go blind. Like if he has any head trauma, it'll detach forever. He'll go blind. They're very worried about him.
Then there's a group softball game.
And something happens where like Kurt tries to fight Dante and then ends up trying to hit his own son, Brandon.
And then like calls Miguel a slur.
And then punches Abe in the back of the head. Like Abe says, don't hit your son, don't punch your son. And when he turns around, he punches Abe in the back of the head. So then Abe's wife, Emily, like jumps on Kurt. They like throw her on the ground and it's just like insane. And Joy is like, well, we have to get out of here. And then half an hour later, there's like a group text being like, let's all meet at the pizza place. And Joy is like, what the fuck is going on? Everybody is like freaking out. She's like, they just got into a huge fight. And QB is like, no, they didn't.
He's like, that was a misunderstanding.
And she's like, no, I watched them hit each other. And he's like, I didn't see that.
So then she's like, okay, I cannot trust Les. I cannot trust Kurt. I don't even think I trust Pam. And QB is like being weird about it. But I need to go to LA because she is done with One Tree Hill. She needs to be auditioning again. It turns out there are like not opportunities knocking down her door because she is a known cult member.
And in Idaho.
And she has said no to like a lot of really good opportunities. So it seems that her agents aren't really like doing that much work for her at this moment. So she goes out to LA, and in LA is when they have this big fight from the prologue where she says, if you like cross these boundaries, we can't talk anymore, or like I'm leaving. And he goes back to Idaho and they're going to get a divorce.
So she stays with her friend Daphne, her friend from the show, Paul Johnson. She calls her mom, her dad. And everybody is just like so relieved. Like everybody is jumping at the chance to help her. She's staying in LA. Her parents are like, we just missed you. We're so sorry. We're so sorry. Like they're not even talking about the family. They're just like, we love you. We missed you. We're so happy you're back.
So then she goes back to Idaho and she has to go to the bank to like figure out what the deal is with her life because she's trying to extricate her life from the family. And she's been bankrolling the family. Like she didn't realize how much, especially after the Emily gambling situation, but she goes to the bank.
So there's this one couple, Juana
and Miguel.
And Juana works at the bank and she realizes that they're the only two people in the whole family with like actual jobs outside of the family. And she's like, okay, weird bond. And Juana treats her as just like a normal customer. She doesn't act like she knows her from the cult. And she's like, can you just show me how much money? And she is shocked. There's $200,000 left. And she goes, that can't be right.
Well, she says there should be like about $2.5 million and she has $200,000. I feel like that's a conservative estimate, right? From 9 years of primetime network television.
Of making like $1 million a year. And she goes, well, the government took 40%. Agents took 10, lawyers 5, manager 5. Subtract what? 120 for yearly expenses, travel, mortgage, rent. I am like, dang, what was she left with? But still.
I guess she spent $100,000 on that musical that never went anywhere.
And then she like bought a house.
Yeah. But how much could a house in Idaho cost?
She says she had like $800,000 left on the mortgage.
That must have been a mansion.
Mm-hmm.
So she leaves $30,000 in the account and puts the rest in a new account.
Which is a big deal because to do that on a joint account, both parties have to sign off. And Juana like risked her job by doing that for her.
Which was really nice of her. And then she gets kind of stuck between Idaho and LA because they have this daughter and he is fighting for custody.
She says one of the more ridiculous statements I've ever heard. She goes, the legal world was so terribly intimidating to me. My only foray into it was that short stint on a CBS drama called The Guardians where I play a paralegal. Okay, that's actually not a stint into the legal world at all.
Okay, I have more experience in law and it's because of a short stint I had watching every episode of Suits.
That's a lawyer.
Thank you.
You and Meghan Markle are lawyers.
Okay, so then she sees her dad. So after she calls her dad to tell her that she's leaving, he was like gushing about how happy he was. He apologizes over and over again for like leaving her feeling abandoned. And then he shows up at her door with a giant suitcase because he has spent the last 6 years gathering as much information as humanly possible about Les, his former ministry, everyone who's ever filed a complaint against him, anyone who's ever like posted on the internet anything, it all linked to anything that he's ever been a part of. He has so much dirt on this guy because he's evil. It turns out he didn't leave his former ministry because he just had different visions for the future. It turns out he is a crook.
Finally, she wins one of the many court cases and is able to take Rosie to Los Angeles. But it's like this hard thing where she's still like sharing the baby with him. It's really tough. But luckily, Danielle is there. And I am kind of like, Danielle, you have to back away from everything in your life that you got from a chat board. Do you know what I mean? Like Danielle's like, don't worry, we're in this cult, but I'm going to help you get out. And Danielle like packs up her whole house and moves her to LA and is Joy's first hire post-divorce and cult. And I am like, no, you have to leave this girl Danielle alone because it's actually like still so fucked up for her to be like this involved in the life of a TV show girl she knows. Like it seems like you're Danielle's cult. She will follow you wherever you go. In a cult divorced, I guess if you walk to hell, Danielle will be like, I'd come. Let Danielle go.
So she spends $300,000 fighting for the custody of Rosie, which she eventually wins, which thank God.
And then they had separated like the financial problems from the custody problems. So after she wins the custody, she's trying to fight for her money back. And the lawyers are like, honestly, they did such a fucked job here. It's going to take us like a year and a half to even get through the receipts. It's going to be another year or two in court. It's going to cost you like $300,000 to get this case. And we don't even know where it'll go. Maybe the feds will take it up because there was like cross-state line money laundering. But he goes, honestly, if I were you, I would just like take your daughter and start your new life. You can't stay embroiled in this.
I moved to a cheaper rental in Studio City. It was on a corner where my bedroom window backed up against the Oyster Bar, and the lid to their dumpster was often left open, hanging out over the rose bush in our front quote-unquote yard patch of grass. Okay. So this was my street.
No way.
The Oyster Bar was the first place I ever did stand-up comedy.
No way.
And I one time saw her at a block party there. Okay, so I lived on Whitsett. If anyone lives in LA, you know, the area has like bouged up a bit. There's an Erewhon now, but like that was not what it looked like when I lived there. That was the Sportsman's Lodge. So there's like the street Whitsett, and then on either side of it.
That's a crazy name for a street, by the way. Could you spell that?
Whittsett. It's right by Weddington Golf and Tennis for the locals. So then behind Whitsett on like either side is like a nicer, like very standard suburban neighborhood. Like if you think about where all the houses that everyone on the Valley lives in, or like the houses that like Katie and Schwartz bought, Tom and Ariana bought, like those kind of like classic LA modern farmhouses, like that was that whole neighborhood. So they were like nicer, like larger homes. Some of them were much prettier than others, but like good single family big homes were behind it. So one time I went to a block party with my roommates. Somehow we like got a flyer for it. We used to go to every open house in the neighborhood because I have seen the inside of every single one of those houses. And I guess at one point we got invited to a block party because we knew the neighborhood well. And I saw her there and I was like, oh my God, that's Haley Scott from One Tree Hill. And I was like, that's so cool how many TV stars live in these cute houses. This neighborhood is full of TV stars. Like, but now reading this, I'm just like, oh my God.
That was her rock bottom. That was like a post-divorce bankrupted by a cult rock bottom.
Where she was like living in an apartment.
That she was like, well, this is as bad as it gets.
And I was just like, oh my God, she lives in one of these cutie patootie houses that I've probably toured. You never know what people are going through, I'll tell you that.
So then she has an epilogue. So it ends with her agreeing and saying, you know what? I have nothing left to protect but her. Sign it. So she like gives up in this financial fight. She just takes her daughter and runs. And she talks about like going to these LA parties. And of course, now the story is out there. And she kind of fights internally with how much she should share with people. And she's decided that it is a disservice to herself and others to like live in the lie that everything is fine. She's like, people who knew me and lost me, it's not fair to them and it's not fair to myself. And it's not fair to the potential victims out there that I could help with my story if I'm like not being truthful about what happened. And she's like, and what happened was I was in a fucking cult. I got married, I had a baby, I got divorced, and I escaped.
And she talks about how there are people who are very dismissive of it. Like once the story was halfway out there, she would meet people at parties who were like, I'm not stupid enough to fall for that shit. And she was like, yeah, I'm not stupid either. I was sad.
And she goes, it's no different than somebody who ends up in an abusive relationship. Would you judge them? Would you blame them and think they're stupid? It could happen to so many people.
And I think this book does do a really good job of illustrating exactly how you could go from like casual Bible study to being in a full-blown cult.
Yeah.
and like how it could happen to anyone. And that's what we were talking about earlier with her parents. So like once she exited the cult and called her parents, they were like so there for her. And I do believe that she was lonely growing up. I do believe that her parents kind of let her down in her teens and especially her late teenage years when she became an adult and needed them the most. But we were talking about like, were they the fucking worst or not? And I don't know, because I do think this could happen to anyone. Like, I don't think you have to have a horribly fucked up childhood and like evil parents for this to happen to you. I don't know if she left that stuff out because she wanted it to be more relatable, or if they just like were kind of bad, but like also this could happen to anyone.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like Cultish is a great book about this that I think we're going to look at. That's the book you got from the library, True, to talk about on the Patreon.
True.
And I think Sounds Like a Cult is a great resource of, there are so many things that are cults. Like, where's the fine line in religion where it goes from a helpful thing in your life or like regular thing that's accepted to cult? Because she found this through religion. And I think all religions have an extreme version that you could call a cult. And there's so many cults out there.
And I think things that you have like found comfort in for so long can like escalate without notice.
I will say this ends with her being like, recalling that time at a cafe when God's voice said, "You need to believe in me." And she hears it again. And he says, "Why do you think I came to you then? Because I told you in good times that I existed so that in crisis you'd remember I was there." I was like, okay.
Yeah. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with believing in God or a religion. I do think that
she like hears him a lot.
Yeah.
And I am like, okay, is it the same voice that told you about the purple shirt?
I don't know.
I would watch it.
Be careful. I don't know. There is like an obvious moral code of like, be nice to people that I don't think you need like a God to tell you about.
How fertile would you say the soil is?
I mean, it's only really about one thing, but she made that thing very enthralling and it is a big deal.
Yeah. I would give it a 4.5 because I think it was like actually a really great book about getting in and out of a cult. I do wish I could have, like, I need more about her childhood so I could know how susceptible she, like, that's the question. Was it way worse than just regular divorce, negligent parent shit? Or was she just like different? You know what I mean? You know how some people are just hardwired for addiction? I am like, were you just hardwired for cults? Like, how much lonelier were you? And how much was that just something you were born with versus society? I'm just very curious.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very curious about it. How many worm teenies would you want to have with her?
It's tough. 1 to 2, one time only. I guess I read the book and I don't need anything else from her. So I guess 0. I don't know that we would actually jibe.
No, I don't think I would want any worm teenies with her. Again, I don't begrudge anyone for believing in a religion. I do think that at the end to be like, and now everything's fine because now I have the right God. I'm just like,
be careful.
Be careful.
You were wrong once already.
You were wronged once. I don't think that believing in God is wrong. I do think being like, anyway, solved. I'm concerned. Cheers. And thank you to our 5-star reviewing wormies.